Little black girl repairs. A millionaire's Mustang, when he sees the ring on her finger. The red Mustang sat stranded on the shoulder, its hood steaming under the afternoon sun. A small crowd had gathered, shaking their heads as the frustrated driver argued with a mechanic who had already given up. Through the murmurs, a slender figure stepped forward. Maya Johnson, only 10 years old, knelt by the car with a calm confidence that seemed out of place for her age. She ran her hands along the engine, eyes narrowing with the focus of someone who understood machines better than most adults. Laughter rippled through the bystanders. What's she going to do? She can barely reach the hood. Yet Maya ignored them, tightening a loose connection and wiping grease across her cheek without hesitation. Seconds later, the Mustang coughed, then roared to life. The crowd fell into stunned silence, their smirks replaced by disbelief. From the back, Ethan Ward stepped forward. His tailored suit and polished shoes marked him as the car's owner. But it was not the engine that held his attention now. His eyes locked on the emerald ring glinting on Maya's finger. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Ethan knew that ring. Years ago, he had left it at Bright Future's home, never expecting to see it again. And now, it was on the hand of a little girl who had just resurrected his car, and perhaps his past. Maya Johnson's life had never been defined by wealth or privilege. She grew up in a modest neighborhood, where bills piled up faster than opportunities, and every day carried its own struggle. Yet even in that environment, her mind shone. She had a natural gift for solving problems, taking apart broken radios, repairing neighbors' appliances, and even fixing bicycles with nothing more than a pocketful of tools. Her talent was admired, but not always respected. Adults would smile at her curiosity, yet dismiss her abilities with a shake of the head. To them, she was still just a child. Few believed that a 10-year-old could see solutions where trained mechanics failed. The emerald ring on her finger was more than a piece of jewelry. It carried the memory of her late mother, who had pressed it into her hand one winter evening, with trembling fingers. "One day this ring will show you the truth," she had whispered, her voice laced with both love and warning. Maya had held on to those words, uncertain of their meaning, but unwilling to let go of the promise. Across the city, Ethan Ward lived in a world entirely different from Maya's. He had been born into money, into a family name that carried weight and authority. In his younger years, there had been a softness in him, a spark of compassion that sometimes surfaced despite the cutthroat business world around him. But time and pressure had changed him. The Ward family empire demanded loyalty, and Ethan had learned to bury doubts beneath polished smiles and expensive suits. There was one memory he could not bury. Years earlier, during a charitable visit to Bright Future's home, an orphanage under his family's influence, he had slipped an emerald ring onto the hand of a frightened child. It had been a fleeting act of kindness, one he assumed would be forgotten. Yet the image of that small hand, clutching the ring as if it were life itself, had followed him for years like a ghost. Richard Ward, Ethan's elder brother, had no such ghosts. He ran the Ward empire with ruthless precision, a man who saw people as tools and loyalty as a currency. To Richard, Bright Future's home was not a place of refuge, but a carefully crafted front. The orphanage received generous donations, appeared in glossy magazines, and was praised at charity galas. Yet behind the closed doors, questions lingered. Whispers spoke of children who left and were never seen again. Paperwork vanished, records were altered, and anyone who dared to probe deeper found themselves silenced. Ethan had long suspected his brother's hand in these shadows, but suspicion was easier to ignore than to confront. Richard always reminded him that family came before truth, and Ethan obeyed. Now, watching the little girl with grease on her hands and his emerald ring on her finger, Ethan felt old suspicions rise with renewed force. The coincidence was too sharp, too deliberate to dismiss. That ring was not supposed to resurface. Yet, here it was, on Maya Johnson, a child whose very presence unsettled the carefully guarded secrets of the Ward family. The pieces did not yet fit together, but one question refused to leave Ethan's mind. What tied this young girl to the empire his brother had built, and how much of his own past was hidden in the shadows of Bright Future's home? Ethan Ward could not look away from the emerald ring. The way it glimmered on Maya's small hand felt less like coincidence and more like a haunting. That piece of jewelry was not meant to return. Not after all these years. He stepped closer, lowering his voice so the curious onlookers would not overhear. "Where did you get that ring?" he asked, his tone sharper than he intended. Maya hesitated. The question carried weight, and she could sense his unease. "It was my mother's," she replied carefully, her voice steady despite her young age. "She told me it was important, but she never said why." Ethan's expression tightened. His heart pounded as fragments of memory pressed against his conscience. He wanted to ask more, but the crowd was still nearby, whispering about the little girl who had fixed the Mustang. This was not the place. With a forced smile, he thanked her for her help and left, though his mind refused to let go of what he had seen. That night, Ethan sat in his study surrounded by old files and records. He pulled out boxes that had gathered dust for years, papers connected to Bright Future's home. At first, everything looked proper: annual reports, donation receipts, glowing articles praising the orphanage. Yet as he compared dates, names, and numbers, patterns began to emerge. Children appeared in one report and vanished from the next without explanation. Adoption documents were incomplete, signatures mismatched, timelines impossible. The inconsistencies multiplied the deeper he searched. Meanwhile, Maya carried her own questions. Later that week, while waiting outside a grocery store, she overheard two adults talking in hushed voices about lost children from Bright Futures, and how no one dared to speak openly about it. The words pierced her curiosity like a blade. She thought about her mother's warning, about the ring, and about the way Ethan had stared at it as if it contained a secret only he understood. Alone in her room that evening, Maya turned the ring slowly between her fingers. For the first time, she noticed something unusual. The emerald was not perfectly smooth. A faint seam traced the edge, almost invisible. With careful hands, she pressed against it. To her surprise, the stone shifted, revealing a tiny compartment hidden beneath. Inside was a small metallic chip, no larger than a fingernail. Her breath caught. This was no ordinary piece of jewelry. Across town, Ethan continued to dig into the Ward archives, his unease growing with every discovery. He was beginning to realize the truth, that the family name he had inherited was not built on success alone, but on something far darker. What exactly had Richard concealed inside the legacy of Bright Futures? And how was this young girl, with his forgotten ring, tied to the secrets his family had tried so hard to bury? The questions multiplied, and for the first time in years, Ethan felt fear. Not of his brother, but of the answers waiting to be uncovered. The night felt heavier than usual when Ethan returned to his office. The quiet hum of city lights outside offered no comfort. Richard was waiting for him inside, leaning against the desk with a glass of whiskey. His voice was smooth, but sharp. "You are chasing shadows, Ethan. Stop before you ruin everything." That warning echoed in Ethan's head long after Richard left. He knew his brother was hiding something. The more Richard pushed him to forget, the more he felt there was truth worth finding. Maya was not willing to sit idle either. Curiosity burned in her chest. She slipped into Bright Future's home under the cover of darkness, her small frame moving quietly through the abandoned halls. Dusty shelves lined with files stretched before her. Her hands shook as she pulled open a drawer. The papers inside spoke of children whose names vanished from records, forced adoptions, and payments that had no explanation. When Ethan joined her later, his face hardened as he flipped through the files. Every page painted a darker picture. Bright Futures was never only about giving homes to children. It was a business, and a cruel one. He could almost hear the laughter of his brother who had turned compassion into profit. But danger was never far. A pair of footsteps echoed outside. Maya froze. From the window, she saw two men watching the building from across the street. They were not social workers. They were Richard's men. Ethan pulled Maya close. "We have to move now," he whispered, urgency replacing fear. On the ride back, silence filled the car. Ethan's thoughts clashed inside him. Family loyalty was something he had been raised to protect at all costs. But how could he stay loyal when his own brother's empire was built on broken lives? His mother's words came back to him. Wealth without truth destroys everything. Maya's voice broke the silence. If we stay quiet, it will keep happening. Her small hands clenched the ring tightly. The green stone glimmered under the streetlight, not as a piece of jewelry, but as a warning. Ethan realized then that the emerald was not just a symbol of his past, it was a key. A closer look revealed tiny grooves along the setting, something almost mechanical. When he pressed gently, a faint click sounded. Hidden inside was a chip no larger than a fingernail. Maya's eyes widened. "What is that?" Ethan's heart raced. "It is evidence, and evidence is what Richard fears the most." But if the chip held the secrets of bright futures, they were now holding the most dangerous piece of proof against the Ward family empire, and danger was closing in fast. The chip lay in Ethan's palm, small enough to be mistaken for nothing more than a broken fragment. Yet the weight of it pressed heavier than stone. Maya leaned forward, curiosity bright in her eyes. She reached for the emerald ring, turning it between her fingers. A faint light blinked once on the chip's edge, then flared alive. Before either of them could react, the dashboard screen in Ethan's car flickered. Lines of code raced across, it followed by folders opening on their own. A voice announced, "Transmission initiated." Maya gasped. "What did we just do?" Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears. The chip was not a storage device, it was a trigger, and now it had been set off. Across the city, computers, television stations, and even mobile phones lit up with a sudden feed. Screens everywhere displayed documents stamped with the logo of Bright Future's home. Adoption records twisted by forged signatures, financial ledgers, showing millions of dollars siphoned through shell accounts and video clips of children crying in sterile rooms. The truth was no longer buried in dusty files. It was alive, flashing across the world. Inside his penthouse, Richard Ward watched the chaos unfold on his wall-sized monitor. His face drained of color as headline tickers erupted. Ward family. Empire under fire. He smashed his glass against the floor, screaming orders into his phone. "Shut it down! Silence it now!" But there was no stopping what had already been unleashed. Back at Ethan's side, Maya clutched the ring, trembling. "Everyone can see it," she whispered. Her words carried both fear and relief. Sirens wailed in the distance. Helicopters cut through the sky above the city as reporters swarmed to the Ward towers. Outside, crowds gathered, some with signs, others with nothing but raw anger. The Ward family name, once untouchable, was crumbling in real time. Richard stormed into the underground garage where Ethan and Maya stood. His eyes burned with fury. "Do you realize what you have done? You destroyed us." His voice cracked with desperation, but behind it lay the same cruelty that had ruled him for years. Ethan stepped forward, standing between Richard and the girl. "No, Richard, you destroyed yourself. All I did was stop hiding it." For a moment the brothers faced each other in silence, one trembling with greed and rage, the other steadied by truth. Richard reached into his coat as if to strike, but the sound of approaching sirens forced him to freeze. Police cars screeched into the garage, their lights painting the concrete red and blue. Officers swarmed the scene. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. Richard tried to speak, but his words drowned beneath the storm. The world was already watching, and his empire was already burning. Ethan looked down at Maya, who still held the ring tightly. In her small hands rested the spark that had set truth free. He bent down, his voice low but certain. "You were right. Silence only keeps the darkness alive. Now everyone knows." For the first time in years, Ethan felt the weight of wealth and power lift from his shoulders. The Ward name no longer defined him. Standing beside Maya, he chose something stronger than blood, stronger than empire. He chose truth. And the world would never see the Ward family the same way again. Richard Ward's fall was swift. Handcuffs snapped around his wrists as cameras captured every second. Once hailed as a titan of business, he was now paraded past flashing lights, his empire collapsing behind him. The world that had once bowed to his name now turned its back in disgust. News anchors declared the closure of Bright Future's home. Survivors stepped forward, their stories raw but finally heard. The walls that had silenced children for years were torn down brick by brick, revealing not just corruption, but resilience. For the first time, their voices filled the air without fear. Ethan Ward stood apart from the chaos, watching the downfall of the family name he had carried all his life. He felt no urge to defend it. Instead, he looked toward Maya, the girl, who had sparked a storm with nothing but courage and a ring. "You did what no one else dared," Ethan said quietly. His voice held something new, humility. "You reminded me that truth is not a weapon to fear, but a light that frees." Maya's small hands tightened around the emerald ring. "My mother told me it would show me the truth one day," she said softly, "but I never thought it would change everything." In that moment, Ethan understood his path. Redemption would not come from wealth or apologies whispered behind closed doors. It would come from rebuilding, from standing beside those who had been silenced. Together, Ethan and Maya announced the creation of a new foundation, not built on greed, but on invention, hope, and justice. A promise to every child that their brilliance would never again be exploited, but celebrated. The ashes of corruption gave way to something greater, a future born of truth. The land once haunted by silence now pulsed with laughter and invention. Where Richard Ward had built walls of secrecy, bright windows now welcomed sunlight. Children hurried through wide doors carrying notebooks, sketches, and bold ideas. A sign above the entrance read, "The Maya Innovation Center." Inside, rows of workbenches gleamed with tools and circuits. Young minds bent over projects, sparks of creativity alive in their hands. No one was overlooked, no dream dismissed. What had once been a place of exploitation had transformed into a home for possibility. Maya stood at the entrance, the emerald ring catching the light. It no longer carried the weight of hidden suffering. It shone as a symbol of justice won and futures reclaimed. Her voice was quiet but certain. "This is what my mother wanted, a place where children are not afraid to be themselves." Ethan stood beside her, no longer the man chained to a corrupt empire. He was not speaking as a millionaire, nor as a ward, but as someone finally free of the shadow that had defined him. His smile carried relief and purpose. Together, they looked out at the children, at the laughter that filled the halls. The past had not vanished, but it had been transformed into strength. Truth had broken free, and its light could never again be buried.